So, a man by the name of Yankel, it's a good Jewish name, and his wife, Yocheved, went to the doctor because the husband had been experiencing some health issues. So, they're in the doctor's office, the doctor checks him out, and then he looks at the wife and he says, "May I have a word with you in private?" So the husband excuses himself to go and sit in the car. The doctor says, "Look, his health is grave, and if we don't make some significant changes, then he probably has a week, maybe two to live." So what we need to do here, the biggest change that we can make is with his stress level. So what I need you to do is, when he wakes up in the morning, I want you to give him a kiss, tell him how much you love him. Then go make breakfast for him. Then serve him breakfast in bed. If he's used to doing chores around the house or yard work outside, don't let him do these things anymore. Have him rest. Have him read a book. Have him watch TV. Go to the grocery store for him. Buy him his favorite foods. Take really good care of him from the morning till the night. And if you can implement these changes, he may have a good 10 years of quality life left in him. She nodded and said thank you. Went back to sit with her husband in the car. He said, "Well, what did the doctor say?" She looked at him and said, "Well, he said you're not going to make it." Bechukotai is the parsha for this week. You know, I like to tease out tiny little phrases from the Torah portion and then expand on them for pages on end. That's just kind of what I like to do. And especially when those kinds of thoughts are supported by those who have come before me who are much wiser. I like taking little pieces and digging a little bit, seeing if we can find more in Scripture than maybe on the surface. In the final parsha of this book of Vayikra, of Leviticus, in the midst of one of the most searing curses ever to have been uttered to a nation by way of warning. Now, keeping in mind that this is Moshe, and he's speaking to Israel about what God may do if they don't change their ways, right? If they don't heed the commandments, if they don't follow the statutes. There is a warning that comes to this nation that is among the most disturbing and critical and serious of all curses that have been uttered to a nation. The sages, however, in the midst of this verse, found a fleck of pure gold. So I'm going to read it, and I want you to see if you can find this golden part of this terrible phrase. This is Moshe. He's describing a nation in flight before its enemies. When he says in Leviticus 26, 36, and 37, "Just the sound of a wind-blown leaf will put them to running, and they will run scared as if running from a sword. They will fall, even when no one is chasing them. They will stumble over each other as they would before a sword, even though no one is chasing them. You will have no power to stand before your enemies." There is on the face of this nothing positive in this nightmare scenario. But that little phrase, nestled in the middle of that passage, "they will stumble over each other." The sages took to mean they will stumble because of each other. This, they said, teaches that all Israelites are responsible for one another. This is an extraordinarily strange passage. Why locate this principle here? Surely, the whole Torah testifies to this idea of loving your neighbor as yourself. Why, when Moshe speaks about the reward of keeping the covenant, he does so collectively? There will be rain in its due season. You will have good harvests, and so forth. The principle that those who call upon the name of the Lord God of Israel have collective responsibility, that their fate and destiny are intertwined, this could have been found among the Torah's blessings. Why search for it among its curses? The answer is that there is nothing unique to Judaism in the idea that we are all implicated in one another's fate. There should be truth in this notion to all citizens of any nation. Indeed, the Master's own words in John 13 contained the beauty and imperative nature of this concept that is found in Torah. When he had gone out, Yeshua said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my Talmidim, if you have love for one another." If the economy is thriving, most people benefit. If there is law and order, if people are polite to one another and come to one another's aid, there is a general sense of well-being. Conversely, if there is a recession, many people suffer. If a neighborhood is scarred by the hideous face of crime, people are reticent to walk the streets. We are social animals, and our horizons of possibility are shaped by the society and culture within which we live. All of this applied to the Israelites so long as they were a nation in their own land. But what about when they suffered defeat and exile and were eventually scattered across the earth? They no longer had any of the conventional lineaments of a nation. They did not live in the same place. They did not share the same language of everyday life. While those in Northern Europe were suffering persecution and massacres during the Crusades, the Jews of Spain were enjoying their golden age. While the Jews of Spain were being expelled and compelled to wander around the world as refugees, the Jews of Poland were enjoying a rare sunlit moment of tolerance. In what sense, therefore, were they responsible for one another? What inexorably bound them together as a nation? How could they, as the psalmist put it, sing God's song in a strange land? There are only two texts in the Torah that speak to this situation, namely the two sections of curses, one in our Torah portion this week, and the other in Devarim in the Parsha Ki Tavo. Only these two speak about a time when Israel is exiled and dispersed, scattered, as Moshe later put it, to the most distant lands under heaven. There are three major differences between these two curses, however. The passage in Leviticus is in the plural, and the one in Deuteronomy is singular. The curses in Leviticus are the words of the Holy One, blessed be he. In Deuteronomy, they are the words of Moses. And the curses in Devarim do not end in hope. They conclude with a vision of unmitigated bleakness. We read in Deuteronomy 28:68, "You will try to sell yourselves as slaves, both male and female, but no one will want to buy you." Those in Leviticus end with a momentous hope. But despite all that, when they are in enemy territory, I will not reject them, nor despise them to the point of totally destroying them, breaking my covenant with them by doing so, because I am the Lord their God. But for their sake I will remember the covenant with the first generation, the ones I brought out of Egypt's land in the sight of all the nations, in order to be their God. I am the Lord. Even in their worst hours, according to Leviticus, the Jewish people will never be destroyed, nor will God reject them. The covenant will still be in force, and its terms still operative. This means that Jews will always be linked to one another by the same ties of mutual responsibility that they have in the land, no matter where they dwell. For it was the covenant that formed them as a nation and bound them to one another, even as it bound them to their God. Therefore, even when falling over one another in flight from their enemies, they were still bound by mutual responsibility. They were still to be a nation with a shared fate and destiny. This is a rare and a special idea, and it is the distinctive feature of the politics of covenant. Covenant becomes the major element in the politics of the West following the Reformation. It shaped political discourse in Switzerland, the Netherlands, Scotland, England in the 17th century, as the invention of printing and the spread of literacy made people familiar for the first time with the Hebrew Bible. There they learned that tyrants are to be resisted, that immoral orders are not to be obeyed, and that kings did not rule by divine right, but only by the consent of the governed. In other words, they instilled the idea that true sovereignty belonged to God alone, and to him alone we owe our obedience. The same convictions were held by the Pilgrim Fathers as they set sail for America, but with one difference, that they did not disappear over time as they did in Europe. The result is that the United States is the only country today whose political discourse is framed by the idea of covenant. Think about that. America was founded on the principles of covenant. One textbook example of this can be found in Lyndon Baines Johnson's inaugural speech of 1965. Here we find the use of the biblical device of significant repetition. Johnson invokes the idea of covenant 5 times with the key phrase of covenant politics, words never used by British politicians or any others, by the way, namely, we the people. In covenant societies, it is the people who are responsible, under the Almighty, for the fate of the nation. As Johnson put it, our fate, quote, our fate as a nation and our future as a people rests not upon one citizen, but upon all citizens. That is the essence of covenant. We are all in this together. There is no division of the nation into rulers and ruled. We are conjointly responsible under the sovereignty of God for one another. At least that is how it should be. The United States is not bulletproof. We can fall just as easily as any nation in the history of the world who has turned a blind eye and a calloused ear to the exhortations of God through his word. When we focus on the pride of nationalism to the exclusion of God's holy law, we risk his wrath like any other nation who does likewise. As believers in the living God and disciples of his Messiah, we are responsible for what we could have prevented, but did not. This remains a powerful idea and an unusual one. What made it unique to Judaism is that it applied to a people scattered throughout the world, united only by the terms of the covenant made with God at Mount Sinai. But it continues, albeit broken and limping at this point, to drive American political discourse even today. It tells us that we are all equal citizens in a republic of faith, and that responsibility cannot be delegated away to kings, emperors, governments, or presidents, but belong inalienable to each of us. Am I my brother's keeper? Asked Cain. Without a doubt, yes. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers. That is what I mean by the strange, seemingly self-contradictory idea that we are all called upon to be leaders. One may protest, if everyone is a leader, then no one is. If everyone leads, then who is left to follow? The concept that resolves the contradiction is covenant. Leadership is the acceptance of responsibility. Therefore, if we are all responsible for one another, we are all called to be leaders, each within our sphere of influence, be that within the family, the community, the organization, or a larger grouping still. When a certain expert in Torah asked the master in the book of Matthew which of the commandments was the greatest, he could have chosen any of the many commandments from the law of Moses. Instead, he distilled all the commandments in these 2. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. In Luke's version, the master then asked the questioner what the Torah said to answer his own question. Quoting from the books of Devarim and Vayikra, the man answered just as Yeshua had answered. From Devarim 6:5, and you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. From Vayikra 19:18, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. In Matthew's account, the master added these words, on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Luke's gospel then provides the setting for Yeshua's sobering parable of the Good Samaritan by quoting the questioner asking the master, "And who is my neighbor?" Out of this powerful story that is most likely known to all of you, the story of a traveler from Jerusalem to Jericho who was set upon, robbed, wounded, and left for dead at the wayside by thieves. From this comes a basis for understanding who the neighbor is that we are commanded to love and what our own status is as a neighbor to those in need. You'll remember that involved in the story were a Cohen, a priest, and a Levite. Both of them passed by on the other side, which I don't know if it was intended to be this way by Yeshua, but there's a little bit of humor here. Because at that time, this road from Jerusalem to Jericho was quite a narrow road, and it goes with the face of a cliff on one side, and this sort of narrow path, and then a cliff dropping off on the other. So when it says they passed by on the other side, they literally couldn't have done it. They would have had to step over the man. There's no passing by and pretending you can't see. I don't know if he did that as a humorous thing, saying that they passed by on the other side. But either way, neither of them stopped to help. Both were preoccupied, or perhaps too busy with the important assignments that they had. Or both were unimpressed, perhaps, with the weightier matters of which Yeshua spoke. Yeshua joined mercy with just judgment and faith as the weightier matters with which we should all be concerned. And in this parable, he defined mercy for us as the care and concern shown by the Samaritan who did not pass by on the other side, but stopped to give immediate and sustained assistance. The master then said to the questioner and to us, "Go, and do thou likewise." Loving neighbor, mercy, giving, service, caring, sacrifice, all are brought together in one compelling, understandable, and personally applicable example. It is easy to speak of love and service, mercy and giving. These are something, hopefully, for which we all strive. Another key component and commandment given by the Master himself with the greatest of urgency was this, found in Matthew 28:19 and 20. "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, teaching them to observe that all that I commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." He gave to us a mandate to take the Torah and its teachings to all the world. We have a responsibility to teach what Yeshua taught. Our neighbor must understand and hear these things. In his last three great summational parables recorded in the 25th chapter of Matthew, the Master taught about the wise virgins who prepared themselves and about the virgins who did not. And then he taught about talents and their bestowal and their enjoyment and their application, or not, and the consequences of our choices. Then in the third and one of the best known of his parables, he taught about a time when the king will return and separate the sheep on his right hand from the goats on his left. To those on his right hand, the king will say, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me meat." That was Matthew 25:34 and 35. You know the rest of that special parable found in verses 35 and 36. "I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." The modest people on the king's right hand will say, because they are honest, or they would not be there, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" They wanted more than anything to enjoy the blessing he was holding out to them, but they did not really feel worthy. I pray all of you know the answer that he gave. You should know it verbatim. "And the king shall say to them, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me." That is not the end of the story. In the rest of the parable, he said some harsh things to those on his left hand. Depart from me into everlasting fire. For I was hungry, and you gave me no meat. And then he went through the whole litany, and they were indignant. Why are we here, they asked. Why are we not on your right hand? When did we see you hungry? Why, Lord, we would have crawled from here to wherever to give you our last morsel, had we known it was you. You remember how he finished? Verily I say to you, inasmuch as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. That was Matthew 25, 45, and 46. These, the book says, did not minister to those who were their neighbors. They did not love. They did not serve. They did not acknowledge a collective responsibility toward them, as the Torah commands both explicitly and implicitly. The Torah, as we know, describes several kinds of salvation. That, namely, of individual personal salvation, which we are to work out with fear and trembling, but also a national, collective, communal salvation of God's people. That's where our responsibility is from. Does this sound like an option to you, the law interpreted in terms of our relationship with the way we treat others, the way we look upon them, the way we regard them as interpreted as the Master did in the parable of the Good Samaritan? When the people of God join hands in collective responsibility, they become a formidable force for good. When this does not happen, we risk his righteous anger based on how we treat his children. We each need to look around, to reach out, to assess our own capacities, and see those who are lonely, disaffected, and feeling unloved. Those people are no less valuable in the Holy One's eyes than the sweetest and handsomest and most talented. I am not suggesting that we run about foolishly, but I am suggesting that we open our eyes and our ears. This principle is sacred in the eyes of Hashem. We are not justified if we pass by on the other side, hurrying to our jobs or to the grocery store, or even to Beit Tikva or anything else, if there is something at hand that we should do that the Lord wants done. I do not believe we should or need to choose between serving God and serving our neighbor. We cannot run faster than we have strength. And it is true also that there are seasons in our lives when we can do no more than at other times. There are seasons when all we can do is breathe and hold on with clenched fists for the time to pass. But all of us can do something, and most of us can do more than we are doing. When we find ourselves in the bonds of unrighteous judgment toward others, we cannot serve them. When we are shackled by the bitterness of what has to be done, what has been done to us, we cannot love. My prayer for each of us is that we choose to serve, we choose to love, we choose to forgive, we choose to remember our sacred responsibility toward one another. And then, let us stand back and see what Hashem will do. May each of us lift up our voices with that of Hezekiah when he said, O Lord, please remember how I have walked before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart, and have done what is good in your sight. I say this in the Master's name.
Amen.